We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Beis Amud Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 42a. This Daf is sponsored by Shalom ben Noim in memory of Moshe Leo ben David. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you would like to sponsor an Amud or a Daf, see the description box below and see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, the Gemara said that there is a minimum shear for tzitzis, but the Gemara is in the middle of asking from a Brisa, which says Ein lo shear, that there is no shear, there is no measurement. And the Gemara now continues and answers, what does it mean Ein lo shear? It means Ein lo shear lamala. It means there's no maximum shear for the tzitzis. Aval yesh lo shear lamata, but there is a minimum shear, as we said on the previous Amud. And Rashi explains, Ein lo shir lamala dechama deboy lahave arach. As long as you want the tzitzis to be, they can be as long as you want. V'yesh lo shir lamata, but there is a minimum shear, as we said on the previous summit. The mishuleshes dalid ba'inan, the loose strings need to hang down 4 etzbos. Avol batzer mehachilo, they can't be less than that. And Rashi continues and notes, v'hadu katani. Now that which we said in the brisa that we were asking from on the previous summit, it says the word mashu, which indicates any amount. That just means to say, mashu nami meskashri gardumi. That's if after the tzitzis are attached, then a tzitzis is cut off and there just remains a stub. That's the mashu, that stub that remains. That is still permitted, but initially there is in fact a minimum shear. And the Gemara continues, because if you don't say this, if you don't interpret the brisa in this fashion, you're going to have a problem with a different line in the brisa, because the brisa also said kayotzebo. It said similarly, lulav ein lo shear, that a lulav has no measurement. Hachanami dein lo shear klala. You're going to say over here also that there's no measurement at all, not even a minimum shear. That's not true. As the Gemara says, v'atanan, but we learned in a Mishnah in Meseches Sukkah, lulav yeshbo gimel tvachim, a lulav, if it has 3 tvachim, kedela naneabo, in order to shake it, kosher, then it is kosher. And so therefore you see there is a minimum shear. Ela ein lo shear lamala, rather what it means is there's no maximum shear. Aval yesh lo shear lamata, but there is a minimum shear. Hachanami, here also with regards to tzitzis, ein lo shear lamala, there's no maximum shear. Aval yesh lo shear lamata, but there is a minimum shear. And the Gemara continues, Tana Rabban, and the sages taught in the Brisa, tzitzis, it says tzitzis, ain't it tzitzis ela anaf. When we say tzitzis, what we mean is anaf, and what that means to say is, again, that it's going to hang loose. V'cheinu omer, and likewise it says, vayikacheni b'tzitzis roshi, it says he took me b'tzitzis roshi, that means he took me by my hair, by those strands that were hanging loose. So too when it comes to tzitzis, again, the tzitzis are braided at the top, but then towards the bottom they are loose. V'yamar Abaye, and Abaye says, V'tzarech lefroda kitzutzisa daramoy. It has to be braided the same way the locks of hair of the Arameans. Rashi explains, V'tzarech lefroda kitzutzisa daramoy kivlo rishalov de kochavim. Again, that was like the hair locks of the ovdei kochavim, of the idol worshippers, which were devukos milmata, towards the head at the bottom. They were braided in that area, prudos milmala, and then they were separated at the top as they got further away from the head. And the same thing is true by tzitzis. Close to the garment is where it's braided, and then further away, that's where the strings hang loose. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the sages taught in a brisa, hitel al karen, if the tzitzis are placed on the corner, on the very edge of the garment, o al hagadil, or on the gadil. We'll see Rashi in a moment on that, but it's the same idea. It's not distant from the end of the garment, it's at the very end of the garment. So the Tanakama says, ksheir, it's kosher. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov posel b'shtein. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says in both cases it is disqualified. Rashi explains, al hakaren al sfas chuda shel karen. Again, it means right there on the border, at the edge of the garment, and deal. Rashi has 2 explanations. Chut ava v'chazak bebeget chila kadei shelo yeh noach likara. At the edge, the hem of the garment is like a thicker material, so if the tzitzis are placed over there, again at the very end, lishnachrina, another understanding, gedil elu hein chutin shebesifsei shnei hatstadim v'korn urlish. These would be like the strings that again they hang towards the very end of the garment, and so again if it's placed over there, it's going to be kosher according to the Tanakama, but it's going to be possible according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And the Gemara continues, Kamana ozlo hada amar Rav Gidol amar Rav. Who does the following statement of Rav, who is he following, Tanakama or Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? His statement is as follows, tzitzis tzricha sheteino tefes al hakeren. Tzricha, the tzitzis, they need to hang along the corner. Rashi explains, sheteino tefes al hakeren, shetei tola umak al hakeren. No, tefes literally means it bangs against the side, against the corner. Kilomar, what it means to say is, kashiyag biena lamala min hasafa, kedei shetei tola v'nogas hatluya b'karen. Essentially, the way many have the tzitzis nowadays, the tzitzis are in a hole that's a little bit raised above from the bottom of the garment, and the tzitzis actually hang off to the side. That's what it means that it's banging against the corner. That's how the tzitzis have to be arranged. Again, no tefes ala karen. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, al kanfei bigdeim. It says al kanfei bigdeim in the pasuk. And so who is that following? The Gemara says, Keman Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That's following like whom? It's following Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, again, he says at the very bottom or at the very edge, it's no good. It has to be in a little bit within the garment. And the question now is how much? And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yaakov says that Rabbi Yochanan says, V'tzorech sheyarchik molei kesher godel. It has to be distanced from the very edge of the garment, the amount of the thumb joint. Rashi explains, sheyarchik molei kesher godel tzorech sheyagbiena min hasaf. It has to be again away from the edge of the garment. Molei kesher godel shir hatziporen im basar ad perak rishon. It's essentially from the edge of the nail until the first joint of the thumb, the first knuckle of the thumb, that distance, it should be from the very edge of the garment. That's molei kesher godel. And the Gemara continues and says, V'itzrich to Rav Papa, and we need the teaching of Rav Papa, V'itzrich to Rav Yaakov, and we also need this teaching of Rav Yaakov. Rav Yaakov here is giving the distance again to the thumb joint, but we also had a distance mentioned before that it has to be, and that had to be the three etzbos. Why? What are these two distances? The Gemara now explains. De'imi de Rav Papa, if we only had Rav Papa, hava amina, so one might have thought, toch gimel de lo lirchik tvei. What does it mean, toch gimel, was it within three etzbos? It means that it shouldn't be too far away from the corner of the garment. That's within three etzbos. V'kama de mekarev mali, but the closer to the edge of the corner, the better. And we would have thought that it could be all the way at the very edge if we only had Rav Papa. So therefore, itzrich to Rav Yaakov. That's why we need Rav Yaakov, that it has to be, again, a distance of the thumb joint from the corner. V'imi de Rav Yaakov, if we just had Rav Yaakov, have amina molei kesher godel de lo likrav tvei, we would have said, again, it can't get any closer to the corner than that distance of molei kesher godel of the thumb joint. But v'kama derachik mali, but the further away it is, the better. And so tzricha, that's why it's necessary to have both, to say essentially the hole where the strings are put through have to be in between these two distances. And the Gemara continues, Ravina v'Rav Sama have a yasvi kame de Rav Ashi. Ravina and Rav Sama, they were sitting before Rav Ashi. Chazir glime de Ravina. Rav Sama saw the corner of the garment of the cloak of Ravina. De sosar uvatzar mimole kesher godol, that it broke, it tore, and therefore there was a smaller amount of distance again from the length of the thumb joint. It was now too close. The tzitzis were too close to the edge of the garment. So Amar Lei, so he said to him, Lo savar lo mar lahad Reb Yaakov. Doesn't the master hold of what Reb Yaakov taught, that again it has to be that distance away from the edge, from the corner of the garment? Amar Lei said to him, B'shas asiya itmar. That's only true when the tzitzis are originally inserted, when they're originally made, but now already if it tore after, that's not a problem. The Gemara continues, Ichsif, when he heard this response, he was embarrassed. And the Gemara continues, Amar Lei Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi said to him, Lo siskif loch. He said to Rav Sama, you shouldn't be upset. Chad minai, who one of them, meaning one of the sages of Eretz Yisrael, Ketrei minon, is like two of us, and therefore you shouldn't be upset that he understood this halacha better than you. And the Gemara continues, Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Rami arba va'ayif lehu meyaf, uma'ayil lehu beglima. Rav Acha bar Yaakov, he took 4 threads, and what he did was, he first folded them, and then he inserted it into the garment, v'avik lehu mevak. And then he looped what were now 8 threads coming out the other side. He looped them through the loop that had been formed on the other side, essentially like a slip knot. And why did he do that? Because he holds, Ba'inan Tamanya Beglima, it has to be 8 strings that actually go in, that are inserted into the hole in the garment. And therefore you have to fold the 4 strings first and insert it in that fashion. Kihechi de lahave Gidil, Gedilim. This way there's a fulfillment of Gidil, Gedilim. We'll see Rashi in a moment. B'makom Psil, in the place of the Psil. Again, we'll see Rashi in a moment. And the Gemara continues, Rav Yirmiyah mi Difti, Rav Yirmiyah from Difti, Rami Tamanya, he actually took 8 strings, the Inu Shitzar, and again, that would end up being a total of 16 once it's folded over, Velo Avik Lahu, but he didn't do the looping, again, that we saw above, he didn't do the looping of Rav Acha bar Yaakov. And the Gemara continues, Mar Brei de Ravina, and Mar, the son of Ravina, Avid Kididan, he did it like we do it, which is you take the 4 strings, you put them through the hole in the garment, and then you fold it at that point to create 8 strings. And Rashi explains, again, Rav Acha bar Yaakov va'ayif lahu, what he did was kofil kodem sheidlim b'tzitzis. He would take the 4 strings and fold them before he inserted them to be the tzitzis. Uma'ayil lahu beglima, he would then put them into the garment. Machnes hakefil b'nekev atalas, and the whole of the garment he would put in that folded part. And Rashi continues, v'avik lahu mevak, then onvan, then what he would do is again essentially create a slip knot. He would take the rest of those threads, which were now 8 strings, and put them through the loop. Shechozru machnes shtayim horoshim besoch hakefil, he would take again within the folded part, he would put the rest of those strings, all of the strings, utulian ba'aniva betalis, and it would be essentially slip knotted into the talis, into the garment. Dahachi darish, and the reason for that is he darshaned as follows, that the word gedil, when you say it braided, that means shnayim, that means that there are 2 threads, and gedilim, and then when it's written gedilim, tarti mashma, that's 2 of those, shehein dalid chutin, that's a total of 4 strings, v'achar kach koflan l'shmona, and then it's supposed to be folded into 8, that's what he understood. And then the Gemara brought from Rav Yirmiyah midifti Rami Ches that he would actually take 8 strings, chutin, 8 strings dechsiv gedilim, because it says gedilim, l'rabos od shnayim gedilim. The reason is because it's written as gedilim with the yud. The idea is that it should be another 2 gedilim, which is double what we had before, double the 4, to have a tmanya chutin, that's 8 total strings. Kach kibla Rabbeinu Yaakov hazakin the Meseches Yevamas. This is what the tradition we received from Rabbeinu Yaakov hazakin. The inu shitzar, again, that would be a total of 16. After he put them into the garment, he then folded it, and it became 16. And then finally, Marberei de Ravina, he did kididon like we do, machnis dalid chutin, he would put in the 4 strings, v'achar kach koflon l'shmona, and then he would fold them, and they would be a total of 8. And the Gemara continues, Rav Nachman ashkechel Rav Ada bar Rava, Rav Nachman found Rav Ada bar Rava, Rami chuti, that when he was inserting the strings into the garment, v'kam avarich lasos tzitzis, he would make a bracha of lasos tzitzis to make the tzitzis. Amar Lei said, my tzitzi shamana, what is this tzitzi bracha that I'm hearing over here? Hachi Amar Rav, because this is what Rav said, at tzitzis ein sricha bracha, that the tzitzis do not require a bracha. Rashi explains, ein sricha bracha, they don't require bracha b'shas asiyah, meaning again, when you're making the tzitzis, when you're inserting the tzitzis, a bracha is not needed. And the Gemara continues, Kinach nafshe de Rav Huna, when Rav Huna died, all Rav Chisda lemirma de Rav ad Rav, Rav Chisda went up to say the following contradiction, Rav against Rav. Umiyama Rav, did Rav really say, tzitzis ein sarich bracha, that tzitzis don't require a bracha? V'ha'amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav, but Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, Minayin letzitzis ba'ovid kochavim shipsula, from where do we know that tzitzis by ovid kochavim, by an idol worshipper, is pasul, is disqualified? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'os asul lahem tzitzis. It says the Bnei Yisrael are asul lahem tzitzis. They should make the tzitzis. Bnei Yisrael yasu. Bnei Yisrael should make it. V'lo ha'ovdei kochavim yasu. And the ovdei kochavim, they should not make the tzitzis. The Gemara asks, "V'hamai rumya," but what's that contradiction over here? Again, we're trying to say a contradiction within Rav. Rav says there's no bracha by the asiyah, and this is a contradiction because an ovid kochavim cannot. And the Gemara continues and explains the contradiction. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Kasava Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda holds, Kol mitzvah sheksheira ba'ovid kochavim. Anytime you have a mitzvah that is kosher for an ovid kochavim to do, so then b'Yisrael ein tzarich levarich. Then if a Jew does it, there's no need for a bracha. But kol mitzvah shepsula ba'ovid kochavim. But if it's a mitzvah that is disqualified for an ovid kochavim to do, b'Yisrael tzarich levarich. So by Yisrael, there does need to be a bracha. So if we're saying the ovid kochavim is not allowed to make the tzitzis, so then that would imply that when a Klal Yisrael, when a Jewish person makes the tzitzis, so then a bracha is said, and that is the contradiction within Rav. Rashi explains, Kol mitzvah sheksheira b'ovid kochavim b'Yisrael eino tzarich bracha. If it's kosher by an ovid kochavim, then the Yisrael doesn't make a bracha. Dein yachol omer asher kiddishanu. You can't say that he sanctified us to ovid kochavim nami kosher, because an ovid kochavim is also kosher. That's the logic behind this rule, and that's the contradiction that he brought within Rav. But the Gemara continues and asks, but is this really a rule? Is it really true that if the non-Jew is disqualified, so then there's no bracha and vice versa? But what about Mila, for example? Diksheira b'ovid kochavim, that's allowed to be done by an ovid kochavim, by an idol worshiper, by a non-Jew. Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, Ir she'ein barofe Yisrael, if there's a city without a Jewish doctor, v'yesh barofe Aramoy, v'rofe Kusi, and there is a doctor who's Aramean, or there's a doctor who's a Kusi, or both rather, which should do it? So the first opinion is Yimol Armoy, the armoy should do the bris milah, v'al yimol kusi, and not the kusi. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says kusi v'lo armoy, the kusi should do it and not the armoy. In any case, both agree that a non-Jew is able to do it, and yet we know, uvi Yisrael tzarech levarich, everybody agrees in this brisa, again, that a non-Jew is allowed to do the milah, but by Yisrael, there is a bracha in such a situation by bris milah. Damar Mar, because the master said, Hamol Omer, the one who does the bris milah, he says the following bracha. Baruch Asher Kedushanim b'mitzvosav etzivanu al hamilah, he says the bracha of al hamilah. And so therefore that contradicts the rule that we just said. And the Gemara continues and answers to that. Midi hu taima ela Rav. This entire reasoning, this whole rule, is according to Rav, and according to Rav, it actually is consistent because Rav mifsal pasal. Rav actually says an over kochavim is disqualified from doing bris milah. The itmar, as it was stated, in other words, Rav disagrees with the Tanoim that were quoted above. The itmar, as it was stated, minayin lamila bovid kochavim shepsula. From where do we know that milah done by an over kochavim is disqualified? Doru bar papa mishmei de Rav Omar. Doru bar papa says in the name of Rav, v'ato as brisi sishmor. It says you should keep my bris. And that tells us you should keep the bris. It's again not good by an ovid kochavim. Rabbi Yochanan says himol yimol. The pasuk says himol yimol. By bris milah we darshan as follows: hamol yimol, the one who himself has a bris milah. So he's the one that is able to give a bris milah. Again, that would mean only a Jewish person. And Rashi explains, Rofa here, the doctor really refers to a moel, somebody who's a moel who gives bris milah. V'al yimol kusi, and then one opinion was it should be the aramoy and not the kusi. Why should that be? Lefi shemol l'shem har grizim. The problem with the kusi is he does it for the sake of har grizim, which essentially is like doing it for the sake of avodah zarah. Kid meforesh hasam Meseches avodah zarah. That's explained over there, Meseches avodah zarah. Midi hu time of the makshir of Chisda. This entire reasoning that Rav Chisda is asking is according to Rav. Elul Rav mifsal pasal. It's only a question according to Rav, but Rav says that it's disqualified. A milah ba'ovid kochavim, milah by ovid kochavim is disqualified. Hilkach ikol amemer de Rav Chisda lo kasha el Rav. Therefore, again, we could say that this whole question was really only being asked according to Rav. V'atos brisi sishmor. It says v'atos brisi sishmor lenimol kamoscha, means you, somebody who has bris milah like you on imosra. That's what I'm giving this mitzvah over to. Or it's learned from himol yimol kari be hamol yimol. We understand that to be hamol yimol, the one who has bris milah. He's the one who's able to give the bris milah. And the Gemara continues, Sukkah Misayale. Sukkah is a support for Rav Chisda, and Tefillin have it to Yufte, but Tefillin is a refutation. Rashi explains, Sukkah Misayale Rav Chisda. Sukkah is a support for Rav Chisda. And the Gemara continues and says, again, Sukkah is a support, and Tefillin is going to be a refutation. Hare Sukkah, we find by Sukkah as follows. Diksheira ba'ovid kochavim. Sukkah is kosher by an ovid kochavim. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Sukkah's ovdei kochavim, the Sukkah of an ovid kochavim, an idol worshipper, Sukkah's noshim, Sukkah's behemoth, Sukkah's kusiyim, Sukkah mikol makom ksheira, could be the Sukkah of women, the Sukkah of animals, the Sukkah of kusim, any kind of Sukkah is kosher. Uvilvan shetei mesucheches kilchasa, as long as it's properly, as long as the schach is made properly. Rashi explains Sukkah mikol makom mefarish beperakam in the Meseches. Sukkah, this is explained in the first parak of Meseches. Sukkah, in any case, all of these Sukkahs are ksheira, and again, it just has to be mesucheches kilchasa. Uvi Yisrael, and by Yisrael, ein tzarich levarach, it's consistent. There's no need to make a bracha. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, osa sukkah liatzmo, when one makes a sukkah for himself, Omer, then he says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shechiyanu v'kiyimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. He makes the bracha of shechiyanu. Ba leishev ba, then when he's coming to sit in the sukkah, Omer Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu leishev basukah. He makes the bracha of leishev basukah. V'ilu laso sukkah lo mevarach. And whereas there is no bracha of making the sukkah, of building the sukkah, that's not a bracha, and so sukkah is consistent with Rav Chisda's rule. And the Gemara continues, but tefillin to Yufte, tefillin, it's a refutation to his rule, because by tefillin, tipsulos ba'ovid kochavim, that we find that tefillin are apostle if made by an ovid kochavim. The Tani Rav Chinana b'rei de Rava, because Rav Chinana, the son of Rava, taught, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Beis Amid Beis.